The classic Fortified versus Tyrannical debate seems to come back every Mythic Plus season. And the question always comes up, which is harder? Is it Tyrannical or is it Fortified? So, from what I've read online, at least in the past, it seems to have always come down to a 50-50 split on which people think is more difficult. However, from recent articles that I've read over the past few months, people seem to be favoring the idea of instead just removing the two affixes and considering them to be a bit outdated at this point. So let's go ahead and get into the video and review the two affixes. So this first post here was a user advocating the removal of both affixes, and they say, however, seeing as mob HP plus damage goes up with each key level, this wouldn't really change much. We would still get to a point to where bosses are impossible because of scaling. Yes, it would allow us to do higher keys, but instead of people timing 24 and 26s, maybe the highest keys would be in the 35 to 40 range. It's a little bit of, I would say a little bit of an overestimate there, but the point is that normal Mythic Plus Keystone scaling would be enough to offset Fortified and Tyrannical scaling. So really, if you think about it, Fortified and Tyrannical almost isn't even needed in a sense because Keystone level scales, right? So eventually you would end up getting to that Tyrannical style sort of boss once you push high enough into that specific key range, and that would kind of give a balance between the Fortified trash as well as the bosses in a single key. Here's another user posting something similar. Fortified and Tyrannical are relics from a different era in WoW, and more specifically a different vision, design, and trial what Mythic Plus could and could be, but they're no longer relevant in the game today. Just remove them already. They create more of a headache without really providing any interesting benefits. Scaling enemies and abilities in dungeons would be significantly easier for the developers if they didn't have to deal with these silly week 1 does this ability, it does way too much damage, but week 2 hits like a soft fill up. Okay. So, according to this user, the affixes aren't really bringing anything to the table in terms of fun, interactive gameplay. Fort and Tyrannical, they're just a flat stat buff. So, in terms of the second part of this post, he kind of argues it'll be easier to balance the bosses and trash from a week-to-week basis. And I think that this is the strongest point being made in this post. So in a game like WoW, where balance is so key to the health of the game, I think removing these affixes would take out a huge layer of balancing, or sort of a balancing act that the developers are already having to do. They're basically having to do double the work to ensure that these dungeons are balanced on, let's say, XYZ affixes on Fort Week, and then ABC affixes on Tyrannical Week. And here we have another user just kind of talking. I think he was specifically talking about how Tyrannical is more unforgiving than Fortified, which I do agree with. It's pretty obvious, but wiping to a boss on Tyrannical Week and wasting your bloodlust just feels terrible, especially on higher keys. So if you couldn't beat the boss with bloodlust, you're probably not going to be able to kill the boss without bloodlust, right? So at least statistically speaking, it's just less likely. So not only are you wasting bloodlust, but you just spent 2 to 3 minutes on a boss. Now that boss is going to completely regenerate his health all the way to 100%, and you've essentially made 0 progress on the dungeon. And not only that, but you also have to factor in the run back to the boss. So now you're 4 to 5 minutes into this boss, and you were already on an extremely tight timer on the dungeon, especially if you're pushing towards your skill ceiling, right? And you don't have bloodlust anymore, and now you have to spend 3 to 4 more minutes killing the boss again. I mean, the key is just pretty much dead 90% of the time, right? It seems from at least the community's perspective, it seems that Tyrannical is just a bit more unforgiving than Fortified. Now, on The flip side of this, many people argue that Fortified is the harder fix because the increased health throughout the entire dungeon actually leads to longer clear times overall. So while Tyrannical is typically more punishing to mistakes, Fortified is more of a DPS check to grind through the mobs, grinding through all those high health pools to be able to time the key. So this is also especially true considering that Fortified also pairs well with other fix, such as, let's say, Bolstering or Sanguine. You get 2 or 3 mobs CC'd into a Sanguine pool, that heals them to full. That can be absolutely brutal to your timer. So on Fort Weeks, just the raw mob health and the raw damage required to complete the dungeon in time is typically considered much higher versus Tyrannical. You got to bring more punch to the dungeon. And then as far as Season 3 goes specifically, I know Tettles made a video just a few days ago, and he kind of explained why he thinks Tyrannical will be the harder fix this season. And I really do agree with many of the points he made. One of his main arguments from his video was how Tyrannical bosses have several more one-shot mechanics this season as compared to Season 2. So this is going to lead to unhealable damage on higher Mythic Plus keys. He also discussed how he thinks we'll have to be running more defensive style comps such as Prop Paladin and Augmentation Evoker to survive some of this high burst damage. So I guess to sum everything up, the main purpose of these two affixes since inception was to make the dungeons feel different from week to week. And while these affixes have clearly done their job from season to season, maybe it's time for something new. I really want to hear what your opinions are on this, so please let me know what you guys think in the comments below, as I think this is a really interesting topic. That's all for this video, guys. Thanks for watching.